He saw her across the grand ballroom, his ex-wife, Celine, the woman he'd discarded like last season's fashion. He smirked, taking in her simple black dress, a pathetic little sparrow in a room full of peacocks. She was working the party, serving the very people he golfed with. It was too perfect. He decided in that moment to finally put her in her place, to show everyone what a mistake he'd never made. He strode over, a cruel sneer on his face, ready to publicly shame her. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't see the man watching from the alcove, the reclusive, powerful billionaire host who was about to introduce Celine in a way that would shatter Richard's entire world. The air in the Metropolis Museum's great hall was thick with the scent of money. It was a physical thing, a heady perfume of old wealth, new ambition, and the faint, floral tang of 1,000 hothouse lilies. For Selina Vance, it was the smell of anxiety. She stood just inside the shadow of a towering Roman arch, her fingers nervously pleating the sleeve of her simple, elegant, and borrowed black gown. She wasn't a guest. She was, in a way, the entertainment, or rather, the keeper of it. As the junior curator of European paintings, the newly unveiled Chevalier Wing was her baby, her triumph, her 18-hour-a-day, stress-fueled, passion-driven masterpiece. Tonight was its unveiling, a gala designed to extract 7-figure donations from the very people milling about, sipping champagne that cost more than her monthly rent. And he would be here, Richard Edward. The name still landed like a lead weight in her stomach, even after 2 years. 2 years since the divorce was finalized. 2 years since he'd sat across from her in a sterile lawyer's office and called her life's work a quaint little hobby. "Celine," he had said, his voice dripping with that patronizing tone that still haunted her nightmares. "I'm building an empire. I need a partner, not a librarian." Candace understands that. She understands stakes. Candace, the 24-year-old model he'd been seeing for 6 months before Selene even found the hotel receipts. Candace, who was now Candace Edward, adorned in the diamonds Selene had returned, living in the penthouse Selene had decorated. Selena clutched the laminated staff badge hidden in her silk clutch. She wasn't a librarian. She was an art historian, a damn good one. This exhibit, securing the loans, authenticating the new Vermeer acquisition, overseeing the restoration of a 17th-century Dutch still life, this was her empire. It was just built of canvas and pigment, not stock options and hostile takeovers. "You okay, Elle?" Selene jumped. It was Sarah, her colleague and friend, holding 2 flutes of champagne. Sarah was rosy-cheeked, her eyes wide with the glamour of it all. "Just nerves," Selina lied, taking a flute. "Making sure the lighting on the Dahim doesn't wash out the chiaroscuro." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Only you would worry about 17th-century lighting techniques when Harrison Ford is standing by the caviar. Relax. We did it. The wing is stunning. Dr. Albright is already weeping tears of joy and high-end scotch." "Dr. Albright is nervous about the guest of honor," Selene murmured, scanning the crowd. The man himself. Dylan Chevalier. "The ghost," Sarah whispered, leaning in. "They say he's richer than God and twice as reclusive. Can you believe he funded this entire wing, sight unseen, and this is the first time he's setting foot in it?" "His office was particular," Selene said, recalling the months of terse, precise emails from a faceless assistant. "He only cared about the Vermeer. He wanted reports on the restoration weekly." "Well, he's about to see the best work of your life," Sarah said, squeezing her arm. "You deserve this night, Selene. Don't let anything, or anyone, spoil it." Selene nodded, but her gaze drifted back to the grand entrance. She knew Richard. He wasn't just on the museum's board. He was a patron. He'd bought his way in, just as he bought everything. He wouldn't miss a chance to perform, to see and be seen. And then, as if summoned by her dread, he appeared. Richard Edward was a man who didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed. He was handsome, in the sharp, predatory way of a hawk. And on his arm, dripping in emeralds that matched her dress, was Candace. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with a vacant, practiced smile. Selene felt the air leave her lungs. It was an involuntary, physical reaction. The old panic, the feeling of being small, of being not enough, clawed at her throat. She instinctively stepped deeper into the shadow of the archway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a curator. She was a professional. She was terrified. Richard's eyes swept the room, a king surveying his court. He was laughing, shaking hands with a senator, clapping a hedge fund rival on the back. He was in his element. Selene was just part of the scenery. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, gripping the champagne flute so tightly she was surprised it didn't shatter. "He won't even see you. You're just staff." But as the thought crossed her mind, Richard's gaze snagged on her. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something. Annoyance? No, it was recognition. And then, the last thing she ever wanted to see. Contempt. He nudged Candace, whispering something in her ear. Candace glanced over, her perfect brow furrowing in confusion, before a slow, dismissive smile spread across her face. Richard turned his back, returning to his conversation. But the shot had been fired. He had seen her. And he knew she was here, on the sidelines. The night, which was supposed to be her triumph, suddenly felt like a trap. Selene spent the next hour in a state of high alert avoidance. She moved through the peripheral galleries, checking on her docents, speaking quietly with museum donors she recognized, and using her work as a shield. She found a strange solace in the art itself. She'd pause before a small portrait by Franz Holz, marveling at the living, breathing energy of the brush strokes. The man in the painting had been dead for 400 years, but his confident gaze met hers. It was a reminder that some things lasted. Empires of finance rose and fell, hype faded, but true mastery, true passion, was eternal. Richard, meanwhile, was holding court. Selene could hear his booming, confident laugh echo off the marble floors. He was positioned near the entrance to the new wing, as if he himself were welcoming people to his exhibit. She saw him gesture expansively, talking to a cluster of men in bespoke suits. He was probably, Selene thought with a bitter pang, telling them about his generous contributions to the arts, neglecting to mention he'd once tried to convince Selene to sell her grandmother's antique locket to contribute to their first apartment's down payment. The divorce had been brutal, not just emotionally, but financially. Richard's team of lawyers, led by the infamous Shark Shapiro, had painted Selene as a gold digger, despite her having been the one who supported them both while Richard was getting his MBA. They'd argued that her art history hobby was a frivolous expense and that she was unentitled to the wealth he had generated. In the end, to escape, to just be free, Selene had walked away with almost nothing. Just her books, her clothes, and a settlement so small it was an insult. She had rebuilt her life from scratch. Her small, rent-controlled apartment, her long hours at the museum for a salary that Richard spent on a single weekend in the Hamptons. But it was hers. Her independence was her most prized possession. "Miss Vance?" Selene turned. A small elderly woman with eyes as bright and sharp as a bird's was smiling at her. She was wearing a vintage Chanel suit and a staggering pearl necklace. "Mrs. Alistair," Celine smiled, her professional warmth returning instantly. "How lovely to see you. Are you enjoying the exhibit?" Mrs. Alistair, Millicent Alistair, was one of the museum's oldest and most respected patrons. She was old money in a way Richard, with his flashy hedge fund, would never be. "Enjoying it?" Mrs. Alistair's voice was a frail, papery rustle. "My dear, it's a revelation. The Vermeer. I have seen it at The Hague. What you've done. The light. You found the light again. My late husband, Charles, he would have adored this. He always said you could judge a curator not by what they displayed, but by what they revealed." Tears pricked Celine's eyes. This was why she did it. Not for the galas, not for the money, but for this. For the connection. "Thank you, Mrs. Alistair. That means more than you know." "Nonsense, dear. It's the truth." She patted Celine's arm. "Now, I hear this mysterious Mr. Chevalier is finally gracing us with his presence. I'm half convinced he doesn't exist. Probably some shell corporation." "He's real, I assure you," Selene laughed. "Though I've only ever dealt with his office. He's very private." "He's also very late," Mrs. Alistair sniffed, checking a delicate Cartier watch. "Dr. Albright looks about to have an apoplexy. He's been hovering by the podium for 20 minutes. Selena glanced over. Mrs. Alistair was right. Her boss, a good but perpetually flustered man, was visibly sweating, his eyes darting to the entrance. The main event, the speech and the official ribbon-cutting of the wing, was scheduled to happen any minute. The guest of honor's absence was becoming conspicuous. A small, satisfied smirk crossed Celine's face. Richard Edward, she noted, was also looking impatient. He was in a small circle with a man Celine recognized as Marcus Reed, a tech billionaire who was rumored to be in talks with Chevalier's corporation about a merger. Richard was clearly desperate for an introduction. His entire performance tonight was likely geared toward this one meeting. "Well," Mrs. Alistair said, "if he doesn't show, you should be the one to give the speech, Miss Vance. You're the one with the passion. Not all these suits." She gave a pointed look toward Richard's group, making Selene's smile widen. "I'll just stick to the art, Mrs. Alistair." "A pity." As Mrs. Alistair moved away, Selene felt a small, fortified kernel of confidence. She knew what she was doing. She had earned her place here. Richard and his posturing suddenly seemed less monolithic. She needed a moment of quiet before the speeches began. The main hall was becoming oppressive. She slipped away, down a side corridor, into the Dutch Masters Gallery, her favorite and currently empty. It was quieter here, the lights dimmed, the air cooler. She was not alone. A man stood in the center of the room, his back to her. He was tall, dressed in a black tuxedo so perfectly tailored it seemed almost an extension of him. No flashy watch, no diamond studs, just quiet, absolute quality. He wasn't looking at the main attraction, the large Rembrandt portrait. He was staring at a small, unassuming painting in the corner, a Vanitas by Peter Claes, a study of a skull, an overturned glass, and a guttering candle. He seemed utterly absorbed, a man at home in the silence. Celine, not wanting to disturb him, began to back out. "It's the lemon," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. He didn't turn around. "Isn't it?" Selene froze. "I'm sorry." He finally turned, and Selene felt a different kind of shock, one that had nothing to do with fear. He was not conventionally handsome like Richard. His features were starker, more severe. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark and intelligent They seemed to see right through her. He looked to be in his late 40s, his black hair brushed with a distinguished silver at the temples. "The lemon," he repeated, gesturing to the painting. "Everyone looks at the skull, the symbol of death. They look at the extinguished candle, the transience of life. But he spent the most time on the lemon. The peel is so precise, you can almost taste the bitterness. Life isn't just short, it's difficult, it's sour." Selene found her voice. "But it's also," she said, walking slowly toward him, "the only source of light and color in the entire composition. The artist is saying that yes, life is bitter. But it's also vibrant and textured, and the most real thing on the canvas. Compared to it, death is just a dull, beige afterthought." The man's intense gaze softened, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. A slow, appreciative smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That is a much better analysis than mine." "It's just a different one," Selene said, blushing. I'm Selene Vance. I'm with the curatorial team." "Dylan," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm and warm. "Just Dylan, a guest. Are you enjoying the gala, Dylan?" "I despise galas," he said, so bluntly it made Selene laugh. The noise, the posturing, the number of people who look at art but never see it. His eyes flicked back to the painting. They'd walk right past this. "It's too small, not impressive enough." "It's my favorite piece in this room," Selene admitted. "Why?" he asked. The question was simple, direct. He wasn't making small talk. He genuinely wanted to know. "Because it's honest," Selene said, thinking of Richard, of the divorce, of the struggle. "It doesn't pretend life is easy. It doesn't offer false hope. It just says, here it is, the bitter, the beautiful, and the end. Make of it what you will. I respect that." The man, Dylan, held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. It was an unnerving, deeply personal level of attention. He seemed to be cataloguing her, reading her in a way that left her feeling completely exposed, yet understood. "You have the eye of a restorer, Ms. Vance," he said softly. "You don't just see the surface. You see the truth underneath." Before she could reply, a frantic-looking man in a headset slipped into the room. "Sir, Mr. Chevalier, we're starting. Dr. Albright is... he's waiting." Selene's blood ran cold. "Chevalier." She looked, stunned, at the man beside her. Dylan Chevalier. The ghost, the benefactor. The man she had been emailing for a year. Dylan's expression didn't change, but he gave her a small, almost apologetic nod. "It seems my anonymity is over. Ms. Vance, your analysis was refreshing. Perhaps you'll allow me to see the Vermeer through your eyes, after the formalities." "Of course, Mr. Chevalier," she stammered, feeling like a fool. He smiled again, a brief flash of warmth. "Dylan, please." He turned and followed his aide, his long, confident strides eating up the marble floor. Selene was left alone in the gallery, her heart pounding a new, unfamiliar rhythm. She had just, unknowingly, impressed the most powerful man in the room. And he had impressed her. The energy in the great hall had shifted. The nervous buzz had solidified into a palpable excitement. Dylan Chevalier was here. Selene watched from the back of the crowd as he was escorted to the small stage, shaking Dr. Albright's hand and nodding politely to the smattering of applause. He was a natural presence, exuding a quiet authority that required no effort. He didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't wave. He simply stood, a picture of calm, as Dr. Albright launched into a fawning, overly long introduction. Selene's mind was racing. Their conversation, it had been so normal, so real. He wasn't a shell corporation or a ghost. He was a man who loved art, who understood the symbolism of a Dutch vanitas, A man who... She stopped the thought. It was unprofessional. He was the museum's biggest donor. She was a junior curator. She scanned the crowd, and her eyes landed, inevitably, on Richard. His reaction was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw was slack. He was staring at Dylan Chevalier, then at Marcus Reed, his face pale. He had clearly missed his chance. The man he'd been trying to impress all night had been in the building for who knows how long, and Richard had been too busy performing to notice. Then, Richard's gaze shifted, sweeping the room until it found Celine. He saw her watching him. He registered her proximity to the stage. His eyes narrowed. He was putting pieces together, but they were the wrong pieces. He saw her, a staff member, and he saw the most important man in the room, and his expression hardened. Dylan kept his speech mercifully brief. His voice, that smooth baritone, filled the hall without him needing to shout into the microphone. He didn't talk about money or investments. He spoke about the responsibility of wealth, the importance of preserving history, and the singular, brilliant talent of the museum's restoration team. As he said it, his eyes scanned the back of the room, and for one heart-stopping second, Celine was sure he was looking directly at her. The speech ended. The ribbon was cut. The Chevalier wing was officially open. The crowd surged forward, a wave of tuxedos and gowns, all trying to get a moment with Dylan Chevalier, who was now trapped in a polite receiving line with Dr. Albright. Celine knew this was her cue to get to work. She was scheduled to be in the new wing, available for questions. She slipped through the crowd, taking a side passage to bypass the bottleneck at the main entrance. She felt a hand grip her bare arm, hard. Well, well, Celine. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Richard. His smile was tight, his eyes cold. Candace was beside him, looking bored and tapping at her phone. "Richard," Selina said, her voice strained. She tried to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened. "I have to hand it to you," he sneered, his voice low. "This is a new low, even for you." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on. Just staff?" He mimicked her earlier, frightened tone. "Or are you trying a different angle? I saw you, slinking out of that side gallery with Chevalier. You're trying to sleep with him, aren't you?" The accusation was so vile, so Richard, that Selene recoiled. "That is disgusting. I was working. Let go of me." "Working?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Is that what you call it? Desperate, Celine. Truly desperate. You think a man like that," he jabbed his chin toward the stage, "a billionaire, would ever look twice at a mousy little curator who can't even afford her own dress?" The casual cruelty of it, the way he knew exactly where to cut, stole her breath. He knew this dress was borrowed from Sarah. "Richard, you're drunk," she said, trying to stay calm. "You're making a scene. I'm just getting started." His eyes were alight with a vindictive, terrible energy. He had been humiliated by missing his chance with Chevalier, and now he was going to take that humiliation and transfer it tenfold onto her. It was his signature move. "Look at you," he said, his voice rising, drawing the attention of a few people nearby. "You're at the biggest party of the year, and you're part of the scenery. I gave you everything. I gave you a life, and you threw it away to go play with dusty old paintings. I left you, Richard," Selena hissed, "because you are a cruel, narcissistic bully. Now for the last time, let go." She wrenched her arm free, rubbing the red marks his fingers had left. Candace finally looked up from her phone. "Richie, stop. People are looking." "Let them look," Richard boomed. Now he was performing again. The nearby circle of guests widened. Celine saw Mrs. Alistair watching with a look of profound distaste. She saw Dr. Albright look over, his face pale with panic. "I want everyone to know," Richard announced, gesturing to Celine as if presenting evidence. "This woman, my ex-wife, tried to tell everyone I was the failure, that I was the one with no soul. And look at her, she's here as the help, serving champagne at a party she could never get invited to. How does it feel, Celine? How does it feel to be a nobody?" Celine stood frozen. It was a nightmare. Every fear she'd had about this night was coming true. The room was spinning. The faces of the donors, the trustees, the art critics, all staring at her, pitying her, judging her. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But she thought of the Vermeer. She thought of her 18-hour days. She thought of Mrs. Alistair's kind words. She lifted her chin. "I may be staff, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But I earned my place here. I'm not a guest, because this wing, it's my work. I'm not a nobody. I'm the curator who built this." Richard threw his head back and laughed. It was a horrible, braying sound. "Built it? You? You're a glorified assistant, Celine. You're nothing. You were nothing when I married you, and you're nothing now." That, a cold, quiet voice sliced through the air, is where you are profoundly mistaken. The effect was instantaneous. The laughter died in Richard's throat. The entire chattering great hall seemed to fall silent, a vacuum created by a sudden, massive shift in gravity. Dillon Chevalier moved through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea. He was no longer the quiet, contemplative man from the gallery. He radiated an aura of pure Arctic authority. His dark eyes were not on the crowd, not on Dr. Albright, but fixed solely on Richard Edward. He stopped directly in front of them, standing so close to Richard that the taller, broader man actually took an involuntary step back. Dillon didn't look at Celine. He just stood beside her, a silent, unmovable wall. Richard's face, which had been flushed with champagne and vitriol, drained of all colour. He looked, Celine thought, like a man who had just seen his entire stock portfolio evaporate. Mr. Chevalier," Richard stammered, frantically trying to reassemble his composure. He stuck out a hand. "Richard Edward Capital. It's a true honour. I was just talking to Celine." Dillon ignored the outstretched hand, letting it hang in the air until Richard, his face burning, awkwardly pulled it back. "Mr. Edward," Dillon said. His voice was perfectly level, yet it carried across the silent room. "I heard your assessment of Miss Vance's professional standing. A nobody. The help. Nothing. It was a misunderstanding," Richard said, his eyes darting around for an escape. He looked at Candace, but she was staring at Dillon, utterly mesmerized. "A private joke." "It didn't sound like a joke," Dillon replied, his tone unchanged. He finally turned his head, just slightly, to look at Celine. His expression was unreadable, but his proximity was a shield. "Miss Vance, are you all right?" Celine, trembling, could only nod. "Good." Dillon turned his full attention back to Richard. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Edward, I am a man who values facts, so let's establish a few." He took a step, circling Richard slowly, like a shark. "Fact. The woman you call nothing is, in fact, the only reason I am at this gala. The only reason this wing exists." Richard's mouth opened and closed. "Fact," Dillon continued, "your quaint little hobby assessment of her career is amusing. Miss Vance's hobby involved identifying a forgery in my Geneva collection that 2 different auction houses had authenticated. She saved my corporation $80 million. Her playing involved the restoration of the Vermeer you see in there, a piece so delicate that every other expert in the world refused to touch it. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Dr. Albright looked like he was going to faint. Celine stared at Dylan. She'd known he was the benefactor, but she hadn't known he was the anonymous collector who had submitted that forgery claim, the one that had been the talk of the art world. You were the Geneva client?" Celine whispered. Dylan's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of warmth. "I was." He turned back to the shell-shocked Richard. "And finally, the most important fact. You state very loudly that Miss Vance couldn't get invited to this party." Dylan moved in one fluid motion to stand directly beside Celine. He didn't just stand near her. He reached down and, with a tenderness that made the entire room hold its breath, he took her left hand in his. "You are correct, Mr. Edward. She is not a guest." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so possessive, so devastatingly intimate, that Celine's knees went weak. "She is the guest of honor," Dylan announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He then looked past Richard, past the stunned faces, and addressed the room at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the disturbance. Richard Edward of Edward Capital was just attempting to publicly humiliate my fiancée." The sound that followed was not a gasp. It was a thunderclap of total, unified shock. Richard Edward's face was a grotesque mask of disbelief. "Fiancée?" he choked out. That's impossible. That's a lie." "A lie?" Dylan's voice was lethal. He never took his eyes off Richard, but he was speaking to Selene. "My love, I believe this is your cue." Selene's mind was white noise. Fiancée. He'd called her his fiancée. She looked at him, confused, terrified, and was it hope? Dylan's dark eyes were soft, urging her. "Trust me." And Selene understood. It wasn't a lie. It was a secret. With a trembling hand, Selene reached into her small silk clutch. She bypassed her staff badge and her lipstick. Her fingers closed around the small, velvet-covered box that had been sitting in there, untouched, for 3 days. She had been too scared to wear it, too scared to believe it was real, too scared that it was all moving too fast. Now, in front of the entire New York high society, in front of the man who had called her a nobody, she opened it. Inside, resting on the black velvet, was a ring. It was not a gaudy celebrity diamond. It was a flawless, cushion-cut sapphire, the color of a midnight sky, flanked by 2 simple, elegant diamonds. It was classic, timeless, and priceless. With Dylan's gaze locked on hers, Celine took the ring from the box and, with a steadying breath, slid it onto the 4th finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly. She lifted her chin, her hand held high, the sapphire catching the light and flashing a brilliant, defiant blue. Dylan Chevalier smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. He wrapped his arm around Selene's waist, pulling her flush against his side. "Allow me to reintroduce you all," he said, his voice booming with pride. "This is Selene Vance, the finest curator in the Western Hemisphere, and the future Mrs. Dylan Chevalier." If the previous silence was a vacuum, this was the stunned, echoing silence after a bomb detonates. Richard Edward stared at the ring. His face cycled through a series of emotions so rapidly it was almost comical. Stark disbelief, raw fury, dawning horror, and finally a deep, sickening shade of green. He looked at the ring, then at Selene's face, then at Dylan's protective, possessive stance. He was not just wrong. He was apocalyptically wrong. He had not been shaming a lowly staffer. He had been insulting the chosen partner of the most powerful, reclusive, and respected man in the room. The man he had been desperate to meet. The man whose portfolio was rumoured to dwarf his own 100 times over. Candace was the first to react. Her perfectly painted mouth dropped open. "Oh my God," she breathed. Her eyes weren't on Selene, or even her husband. They were on the ring, her expression a toxic mix of jealousy and calculation. Richard stammered, his hands flapping uselessly at his sides. "Fiancée, Selene, this is a joke. You're lying." "She's lying, Chevalier. She's a manipulator. She's playing you. She did the same thing to me." It was the desperate, pathetic gambit of a cornered animal. Dillon didn't even flinch. He simply raised an eyebrow. "She's playing me, Mr. Edward? By doing her job with unparalleled brilliance? By impressing me with her integrity and passion when everyone else in this room wanted to impress me with their bank statements? You misunderstand the game." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential, lethal whisper that only those in the immediate circle could hear. "She didn't tell you about us, did she? That's because you, Richard, are a footnote in her life. A bad chapter she has already closed. You are so irrelevant to her new life that it never even occurred to her to mention you." He turned to Selene, his entire demeanour softening. He brushed a stray wisp of hair from her cheek, a gesture of such profound tenderness that it served as a final, brutal nail in Richard's coffin. "I apologize, mon amour," he murmured, loud enough for Richard to hear. "I was planning a much more romantic announcement, over dinner, in Paris, but this individual forced my hand." He then looked over Richard's shoulder, his eyes finding Marcus Reed, the tech billionaire. "Marcus," Dillon called out, his voice pleasant. "Good to see you. I'm afraid I won't be able to make our meeting tomorrow. Any associate of Mr. Edwards is, unfortunately, an associate I cannot trust. My team will be in touch to dissolve the preliminary acquisition talks. My apologies." Richard's world imploded. "No!" he gasped, spinning around. "Marcus, wait! This is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with business." Marcus Reed, a shrewd man who had not gotten where he was by backing the wrong horse, just shook his head, his expression one of pure disgust. "You just publicly harassed the fiancée of Dillon Chevalier, Edward. You called her nothing. You think that's personal? That's a character flaw, and it's a fatal one. We're done." Reed turned and walked away, melting into the crowd. Richard was hyperventilating. You can't. That was a $300 million deal," he shrieked at Dillon. "It was," Dillon agreed, his voice cool. He took Selene's hand again. "Now, if you'll excuse us. My fiancée was promised a private tour of her own exhibit. Dr. Albright, who had been vibrating with a mixture of terror and glee, snapped to attention. "Yes, Mr. Chevalier. Right this way, Mr. Chevalier. Ms. Vance." Dillon wrapped his arm firmly around Selene's waist and guided her away from the scene. The crowd of onlookers, donors, and critics parted for them, their faces a mixture of awe, respect, and, for Selene, newfound admiration. Selene didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could hear, behind her, the sound of Candace's voice, high and shrill. "You idiot! You absolute idiot, Richard! You ruined everything!" She heard the sound of a champagne flute shattering on the marble floor. She heard the sound of Richard Edward, for the first time in his life, being utterly, completely, and devastatingly silent. Dillon led Selene not into the new Chevalier wing, but back to the small, quiet Dutch gallery where they had first met. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, sealing out the noise of the gala, Selene's legs gave out. Dylan caught her, his hands strong on her waist, guiding her to a velvet bench. "Breathe, Selene," he said softly, sitting beside her. She was trembling, her head spinning. "Fiancée," she whispered, looking at the stunning, heavy sapphire on her finger. "Dylan, what was that? You destroyed him." "He destroyed himself," Dylan said, his voice gentle but firm. "He laid the dynamite and lit the match. I merely pointed out that he was holding it. But to say that, to do that, in front of everyone, our engagement, we haven't we?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. He reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a small black velvet box, the twin of the one that had been in her purse. Selene's jaw dropped. "How? I have been carrying this in my pocket for 3 days, Dylan said, his dark eyes intense. "Ever since it arrived from Cartier, I was waiting for the right moment. I thought, perhaps tonight, after the gala, I would take you to the rooftop garden, or, as I said, I'd fly you to Paris this weekend. I am not always good with the grand, romantic gesture. I am better with facts." He took her hand. "The fact is, Selene Vance, I have been half in love with you for a year, ever since your first brilliant, passionate, and slightly insubordinate email about the Vermeer restoration." Selene laughed, a choked, watery sound. "I was not insubordinate. I was firm." "You were," he agreed. "You told my assistant, and I quote, 'Mr. Chevalier's timeline is irrelevant. The canvas will tell me when it is ready. Art does not bow to a quarterly report.'" It was the most refreshing thing I had read in a decade. Celine's mind was racing, connecting the dots. "The Geneva client, that was you. That's why you funded the wing." "That was why I initially funded the wing," he corrected. "I was impressed by your eye. Then I asked to meet you. 3 months ago." "The consultant from the Chevalier Foundation," Selene breathed, remembering the first coffee meeting. The handsome, quiet man named Dylan, who said he was just reviewing the Foundation's philanthropic portfolios. "I was not entirely honest," he admitted. "I told you I was an employee because I wanted to meet you, Selene, not the junior curator trying to impress a donor. I wanted to meet the woman who wrote those emails, the woman who saw the truth in a 400-year-old painting." Their secret. It had been their secret. The past 3 months, they had been a whirlwind. Quiet dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, late-night walks through Central Park, discussing art and history and life. His trips to New York, ostensibly for business, but always ending with a knock on her apartment door. She had fallen in love with Dylan, the thoughtful, brilliant, and intensely private man from the Foundation. She'd had no idea he was the Dylan Chevalier, not until he'd stepped into her office 2 weeks ago, saw the final restoration, and said, "It's perfect. You are perfect, and I have not been telling you the whole truth." He had confessed everything, who he was, why he'd sought her out, and how he had, quite unexpectedly, fallen completely in love with her. 3 days ago, he had given her the ring box. "I'm asking you to consider it," he'd said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "I know who I am. I know the world I live in. It's a gilded cage, much like this one. I do not want to trap you, Selene, but I find I am unwilling to live in it without you. Do not give me an answer. Not yet. Just keep it, and know that it is real." She had kept it, hidden, terrified of what it meant. And tonight, Richard had given her the answer. "You knew he would be here," she said, finally understanding. "You knew he was my ex-husband." "I am a man who values facts," Dylan repeated. "I do my research. I knew who he was. I knew what he did to you. I knew he was on the board, and I knew he would be here. I suppose I hoped he would ignore you, but I also prepared for the possibility that he would not." "You were protecting me," she whispered. "I am protecting us," he corrected, his thumb stroking the sapphire on her finger. "He called you a nobody. I wanted him, and the world, to know he had thrown away the single most valuable person I have ever met. He needed to understand, in no uncertain terms, that his opinion is, and always will be, irrelevant." He stood, pulling her to her feet. He framed her face with his hands, his gaze locking with hers. "But that was a performance. For them," he said, his voice low and raw. This is for us." He took the ring off her finger. "Celine Vance," he said, and his voice, the voice that had cowed a room and dissolved a $300 million deal, was thick with emotion. "You see the truth in everything? You see the light in the shadows? You have restored more than just my paintings. You have restored me. He thought your passion was a weakness. I know it is your greatest strength. Will you marry me? For real. No audience, no ex-husbands, just you and me." Tears were streaming down Selene's face, all the fear, the humiliation, the years of feeling small and worthless, it all washed away. She was not a nobody. She was not the help. She was Celine Vance, and she was loved. "Yes," she cried, laughing and sobbing all at once. "Dylan, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring back onto her finger, the sapphire sliding home, this time for good. And in the quiet, empty gallery, surrounded by the Dutch masters, Dylan Chevalier kissed his fiancée. It was not the chaste, public kiss on the hand. It was deep and passionate, and it was a beginning. They stayed in the quiet, shadowed sanctuary of the Dutch gallery for a long time. The door was closed, the thick oak and velvet soundproofing a barrier against the world they had just turned upside down. The distant, muffled thrum of the party felt like it was from another life. Celine finally let go, sinking onto the velvet bench, the one where she had first sat as Ms. Vance, the curator. Now she sat as Celine, the fiancée, and the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. She was still trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her hands icy and her mind numb. Dylan sat beside her, not crowding her, but his presence was a solid, warm wall. He said nothing, simply waiting, giving her the gift of silence. He used to do that," she whispered, her voice cracking. She stared at the floor, at the intricate pattern of the parquet, unable to look at the priceless art or at the priceless man beside her. In public, at his office parties, he'd introduce me as his little hobbyist. He'd tell his partners how quaint it was that I played with my dusty books while he was building the world. He made me feel so small, so stupid, like my passion was a character flaw. She took a shaky breath, the dam of years of curated composure finally breaking. The night I left, the final night, I had just gotten a research paper published in the Art Historical Review. I was so proud. I'd worked on it for a year. I showed it to him, and he glanced at the cover and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you see what the market did today? I made us more in the last hour than you'll make in your entire life." He tossed it on the coffee table, and it knocked over a wine glass. It stained the entire front page. She was crying now, silent, hot tears of humiliation, relived. He didn't even apologize. He just sighed, like I had inconvenienced him. That was it. That was when I knew. It wasn't just that he didn't respect my work. He didn't respect me. And tonight, when he grabbed me, I was right back in that apartment, with the spilled wine and the look of utter contempt on his face. I was that small, stupid person all over again. Dylan's hand, which had been resting on the bench, finally moved. He didn't pat her shoulder. He didn't offer a platitude. He took her left hand, the one with the ring, and held it firmly in both of his. His palms were warm and strong. He lifted it, turning it over, tracing the veins on her wrist with his thumb as he studied the sapphire, as if it were a piece of art he was committing to memory. "He will never speak to you again," Dylan said. His voice was not the warm baritone of the gallery, nor the passionate whisper of his proposal. It was a flat, cold, and utterly final tone. It was the voice of a man who moved markets, who built and dissolved empires with a single phone call. "He will never be in the same room as you again," he continued, his dark eyes finally lifting to meet hers. There was a fury in them, but it was a controlled, Arctic fury, more terrifying than Richard's loud, braying anger. "The museum board will convene an emergency ethics session tomorrow morning. I will be attending, via video call. They will be given a choice, his patronage or the Chevalier endowment. They will choose the endowment. He will be removed from the board by lunch." Celane's breath hitched. "Dylan, you don't have to." "I don't," he agreed. "But I will. His deal with Marcus Reed is dead. I will ensure any other partners in my sphere are aware of the character risk involved in an association with Edward Capital. He did not just insult you, Selene. He threatened my future wife. He put his hands on her. He will find that the world he built is suddenly and permanently very, very cold. That part of your life, the part where you are small, is over. I promise you." He leaned in, and, with a tenderness that shattered her, he kissed the tears from her cheeks. "You are not a hobbyist, mon amour. You are a master. Now, shall we go home?" When they finally emerged, the party was unrecognizable. The great hall was nearly empty, the air stale with the smell of dying lilies and spilled champagne. The remaining guests, the hardcore contingent, the ones who would never leave a party while free alcohol was being poured, were clustered near the bar. As Dylan and Selene walked toward the main staircase, a hush fell. The whispers were audible. "That's her. The fiancée. Edward is ruined. Chevalier just, my God." They didn't just part the crowd. The crowd recoiled, as if from a source of intense gravity, all of them desperate to see, but terrified of being seen. Selene saw Mrs. Alastair, the old money patron, standing near the coat check. The elderly woman caught Selene's eye. She didn't smile. She just gave a slow, deep, approving nod. It was a sign of respect, a welcome. Dr. Albright, who had clearly been waiting for them, skittered over, his face a mess of sweat, awe, and terror. "Mr. Chevalier, Miss Vance, Selene." My goodness. Good heavens. Congratulations is hardly the word. I mean, I had no idea. This is simply astonishing. "Thank you, Dr. Albright," Selena said, and she was amazed to hear her own voice, steady and warm. The tremble was gone. "It's been a remarkable evening." "Indeed," Dylan said, slipping his hand to the small of her back. "And it's given me time to think. Dr. Albright, I was so impressed with the Chevalier wing, but my discussions with Selene, it's clear the entire restoration department is operating on a shoestring. That changes. Effective tomorrow." Dr. Albright went rigid. Mr. Chevalier, I am doubling the Foundation's endowment. Dillon said, as casually as if ordering coffee. "But it will be restructured. The new funds will establish a state-of-the-art technical analysis lab, endow 2 new senior fellowship positions, and create a new director-level position to oversee all of it. A salary commensurate with that of a top-tier financial CEO, not a hobbyist." He paused, letting the weight of his words land. "That new director, of course, will be Celine. She will have full autonomous control over the department, its acquisitions and its research. She will report directly to the board, not to a subcommittee. I trust these terms are agreeable?" It was not a question. It was a directive. Dr. Albright, a man who had spent his career begging for scraps, looked like he might faint. "Agreeable? Mr. Chevalier, it's a miracle." "Yes, of course. Selene, Director Vance, this is wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you, Dr. Albright," Selene said, squeezing his arm. "I look forward to discussing the details." Dillon nodded once. "My office will send the paperwork." He didn't wait for another fawning reply. He guided Selene away, down the grand marble steps, his pace unhurried. The walk felt different. Her heels clicked with a new, definitive sound. She wasn't fleeing. She was exiting. At the bottom of the steps, near the coat check, she saw him. Richard. He was a collapsed ruin. He was slumped on a velvet bench, his multi-$1,000 tuxedo, once his armor of power, now hopelessly rumpled. His perfect blonde hair was in disarray where he had been gripping it. An overturned, empty champagne flute lay at his scuffed shoes. He was alone. Utterly, profoundly alone. As if sensing her, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollowed out by disbelief and pure, undiluted panic. He saw them. He saw Selene, not in the simple dress he'd mocked, but in what now looked like a statement of supreme, understated elegance. He saw her, radiant and composed, her head held high. He saw the impossible, midnight blue sapphire flashing on her hand, and he saw her held, possessively, by the man whose single, quiet word had just vaporized his entire life. He saw the woman he had called nothing, standing on the precipice of inheriting the world. Selena met his gaze. She searched within herself for any lingering emotion, for the triumph she thought she'd feel, for the pity she ought to feel, for the anger she had a right to feel. She found nothing. It was not forgiveness. It was, as Dillon had said, irrelevance. The space he had occupied in her heart and her head, the space that had caused her so much pain, was simply empty. He was a footnote, a bad chapter, a painting she had restored and moved on from. She turned away from him, breaking the gaze, and walked out the towering bronze doors into the cool night air. A sleek, black Bentley. Not a taxi, not an Uber, but a private car, was waiting at the curb. The driver, a man with the discreet professionalism of a Secret Service agent, held the door. Dillon helped her in, his hand warm on hers. The heavy door shut with a solid, satisfying thud, encasing them in a world of rich leather, polished wood, and absolute, perfect silence. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the museum, the party, and her old life behind, Selene let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 5 years. "Charles," Dillon said to the driver, his voice returning to its normal, warm timbre. "To the airfield. Have the jet prepped for Paris." Selene's head snapped toward him. "Paris? Tonight?" "Dillon, I don't have a passport. I don't have clothes." He smiled, a genuine, delighted smile that lit up his dark eyes. He reached into his inner tuxedo pocket and produced, not 1, but 2 navy blue passports. He handed her one. "My love, my staff packed a bag for you 3 days ago, just in case you said yes. It's already on the plane." I am, as I said, a man who prepares. You were that confident, she breathed, stunned. No, he said, his expression softening. I was that hopeful. However, I am also starving, and the jet catering is good, but it's not what I'm in the mood for. He tapped the intercom. Charles, find the best, greasiest drive-through cheeseburger you can find between here and Teterboro, and a chocolate shake. Selene? She laughed, a real, bubbling, joyous laugh that felt foreign and wonderful. A strawberry shake, she managed. A strawberry shake, Dylan confirmed, and sat back, taking her hand. I still owe you a proper proposal, he said softly, as the car sped toward the West Side Highway. One without an audience, and without a villain. On the Pont des Arts, perhaps. At sunrise. Selena leaned her head against his shoulder, the wool of his tuxedo soft against her cheek. She looked at the flashing sapphire, then at the man who had placed it there. Dylan, she whispered, what you did in there. It wasn't just a proposal. You didn't just give me a ring. You gave me back my name. You gave me back my work. You gave me back myself. How can Paris possibly top that? It won't, he murmured, kissing the top of her head. It will just be ours. But for the record, I think tonight was just about perfect. Selene closed her eyes, the lights of the city blurring past. She thought of the Vanitas painting, the skull, the candle, the lemon. Richard had been the skull, a dull, dry, beige afterthought. But her life now, it was the lemon. Vibrant, textured, a little sour from the past, but so real. And for the first time in a very long time, it was bathed in the most brilliant, beautiful light. And just like that, Richard Edward learned that the loudest voice in the room isn't the most powerful. He tried to extinguish Selene's light, forgetting that she was the one who created it. His world, built on ego and intimidation, collapsed with a single, quiet word. Fiancée. Selene's revenge wasn't loud. It was the undeniable, glittering fact of her happiness. The ultimate success isn't just rising above those who tried to pull you down. It's finding someone who sees your true worth, even when you've forgotten it yourself. What did you think of Richard's instant karma? Have you ever seen someone so arrogant get taken down so perfectly? Let me know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. And if you loved Selene's incredible story of vindication, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice and new beginnings. Thanks for listening.